Are there constructive things that you can do to help restore a culture of life? Find out next on this edition of Life Matters. Brian Johnston is the Western Director of the National Right to Life Committee. He has served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives, as California Commissioner on Aging, as Chairman of the California Pro-Life Council, on the board of the National Legal Center for the Medically Dependent and Disabled. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters. We're your program on life, on culture, and the very real battle of ideas. You see, the right to life is a very specific idea that our founders put in the founding documents of our nation, and they were reflecting a cultural value they'd inherited through Western civilization. What is that value? That human life is significant, that human beings are not merely animals, and therefore that the laws should protect vulnerable human beings from the predations of people who would take advantage of them, even the government, but even bad guys. The right to life of the innocent should be protected by the government. That's why policemen have badges. That's why they have guns. And so this principle of protecting the right to the life, this principle of protecting the right to life of the vulnerable innocent is what led us up to 1973. We had laws that protected babies in the womb, some of the most vulnerable human beings you can think of. But the Roe v. Wade decision changed all that, didn't it? And that's why Roe versus Wade is hugely significant. It's on a collision course with itself. That's the problem with Roe. It isn't really founded in logic, nor is it founded in the basic principles of the law. That's why eventually it must be overturned. So our program is dedicated to the idea of the right to life. And then there's a culture that emanates from this idea that human beings are different, that human beings are more than animals. That culture is the culture that you live in. That's Western civilization. But there's a war now over Western civilization. You already know that war, that battle of ideas. There's crazy ideas being pushed on you, being pushed through the media. If you're not engaged in this battle of ideas, if you're just watching, if you're just turning on your television, or even like this radio, if you don't engage and think, you're going to get taken in this battle. So we want to equip you. Right now, we're dealing with an issue of elections. And while we're recording this in the fall of 2018, but the way we do Life Matters Radio is we're very up to date. We talk about issues right now. And so you'll appreciate this program and two of our guests, extraordinary individuals. Dennis Prager is one. There's a little teaser for you. But the fact is that we're heard on both Christian radio and on talk radio. And we're also heard via podcast. And the reason we do this program is to equip you, so we focus on very specific principles that apply all the time. This is a deep dive, and we're taking a deep dive now in this program and in several others that we've had previous on elections as a season. So we'll talk about that again, that elections is not merely a day, it's a season that you must prepare for, just as you have to prepare for every other season. So right now we're going to go to a special guest, Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager hosts a radio show on the Salem Network. Many of you know Rabbi Dennis, a great man, a wonderful man. I was fortunate enough to spend some time with him at a conference down in Costa Mesa, California. He hits some of the issues that we often talk about, but he's underscoring the need in 2018 and then whenever there is elections, that you really wake up, that you really get involved and see your responsibility. So I think you're going to enjoy this time with Dennis Prager, Salem radio host. We are here at a very important conference in Costa Mesa.
Right.
Speaking to California pastors. Why?
Correct.
Why is this important?
Well, in my view, and I'm a Jew saying this, if Christianity fails in America, America is over. If America is over, the West is over. Because America really is literally the last best hope because Europe is essentially radically secular.
Yes.
So if you guys don't carry the ball, it's taps for the United States. I'm totally open with you. I say that to my own audience. I say that to Jewish audiences. So I'm here to help clarify what the battle is about, to help encourage the pastors to work harder,
yes,
to get out the vote. And that's why I'm here.
That's right. That's right. And really, the faith, the layman, the whole concept of the layman, I think, is a disservice because as in Israel, the IDF, and the tradition really of evangelical Christianity is that we are all priests.
That's right.
Is that each of us who turn to God must turn to God and then act on what he has before us to do. So it isn't just for the pastor to do.
No, that's entirely true. It just happened to be speaking to pastors, but
Yes, right.
Of course you're right. And the notion that we don't have to fight and we leave it to God is so unbiblical that I don't even know where people come up with that stuff. Could you offer me an example? God even says to Moses at one point, one of my favorite verses, this is not the time to prolong prayer. Get out there and do your thing.
Yes. It's action.
Yes, yes. Otherwise, why did God make us? Why is there life?
That's right.
And we owe it to the people who died before us at Normandy and making the revolution to
Yes.
keep America strong.
Yes.
So to me, it's clear.
Quick change, Dennis.
Yep.
This year.
Yep.
This year in particular, right now,
Right.
the Kavanaugh hearings have been paused. There's great significance to that. But everything right now in 2018, the significance of this year, I sense, is almost beyond measure.
It is beyond measure. It's only second to 2016 in the significance in the history of American elections. If Americans want to see the next 2 years spent in attempting to undo the last election, then they should vote Democrat. That's what will happen. All it will be is investigation after investigation. It will be like a third world corrupt country.
That's right.
The stakes are so great, it's, as you say, immeasurable.
And it's not about personality, and that's what they want to make it about, this president's personality.
That's
policy.
That's where religious people have more wisdom.
That's
The Bible, God uses all sorts of human beings for his ends.
Yes.
And I don't vote for personality. I just wrote an article in my syndicated column last week. This notion that a president is, this role model for children. I grew up with John F. Kennedy. Was he a role model for children? I mean, please,
He was
and
a
by the way,
rapscallion. Right.
it doesn't matter. Lyndon Johnson.
Oh.
I was going to look to Lyndon Johnson. Did my father ever say to me, Dennis, you should really look to the president for guidance? It didn't occur. I had my father, my grandfather. I had my uncles. I had my rabbi. I had my father's friends, my parents' friends. I had so many male role models. It never occurred to any of us. Use the president. The president is there to be president.
That's right. Policy. It's all politics.
Right.
Is policy.
All right.
Dennis Prager,
God bless
an
you.
honor, sir.
Thank you.
An
It's
honor.
my honor.
Life Matters continues after this.
Do you have a car you aren't using anymore? You can donate your car or boat, mobile home, trailer, or motorcycle, even property, to California Pro-Life Council and get the highest amount possible in a tax deduction. That's right. Our donation program doesn't just turn around and dump the car. Our volunteer team of experts get the car in its best reasonable shape and then sell it at auction to the highest bidder. You get the best tax deduction, and California Pro-Life gets the highest amount that it can to assist us in reaching Californians for life. If you'd like to get the most out of your car, boat, or motorhome, go to CaliforniaProLife.org. Scroll to the bottom of the page and click on Donate Car. That's CaliforniaProLife.org. Your car can make a difference, and make a difference for life.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
It was wonderful to hear from Rabbi Prager. You're listening to Life Matters radio and podcast. If you're listening on podcast, you know that we take a deep dive into particular issues, and we're spending some time talking about elections and their significance and how we view elections as a season. So whether you're hearing this in 2018 when it was originally recorded, or you're listening in another election year, all of this applies. It all applies to you right now in your responsibilities as a citizen. As we've talked about before, the right to life is a very specific thing. It is an assertion of a legal right, which is the duty of the government to protect. So civics and the government's role in our lives is of immeasurable significance. And if you don't know that, if you don't care, if you've dismissed the significance of that, if you're merely a religious person, just you and God, that's nice, but there's more. Because It isn't just about you and you being happy. And I know there's a lot of emphasis on that. God wants me happy. But there's much more to how the universe is ordered. You know, the right to life is specifically drawn from the principle that nature has revealed God. That's right. Nature reveals who God is. In Romans 1:20, it says that God has revealed his invisible nature through his visible creation. And our founders said something very similar, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. So in other words, your Creator gave you your rights. The first is the right to be alive, and the government's duty is to protect your life and your right to be alive. That's its first duty. Now, the other thing that the founders said is that we're doing this according to the laws of nature and of nature's God. According to our founders, it doesn't matter what your religion is. These are self-evident truths. You can just look out at nature and see this principle that human beings are alive, that we are certainly something more than animals. What more? Well, you'll need to think and consider deeply. You have to be a thinker, really, to follow the Constitution and the principles of America, and you're invited to do that by America's founders. You've been given that gift to think about what you have. But in the meantime, there's a duty of government to protect us, and there's a duty that you now have to make sure that the government does that. You need to be involved in the civic process, and that's why we're taking this deep dive into elections. Remember, elections are a season. And go back to previous podcasts. If you're listening to radio, go to the podcast site, lifematters.life. Subscribe to the podcast. There have been several that talk about elections as a season, and it's just not election day. That's merely when votes are tallied. If you view it as election day, you're going to hate election season. It's going to irritate you because you don't understand. Understand that elections are when the laws are going to be determined, because it's lawmakers that make laws. And if you're not engaged in understanding the process of electing lawmakers, you're missing out entirely. You're missing out about the message of America and the freedoms you've been given, particularly because you're a human being. That's why you're given those freedoms. You are unique, and the law has a duty to protect you in your uniqueness. And our founders said that. I'm not making this up. This isn't my original idea. This is the idea that's at the very heart of our culture. And if you miss that, then people will throw weird ideas at you and be insistent and pull you away from the real significance of what elections are about. We're going to join now a gentleman that took it upon himself to be responsible. He's actually a pastor, Rob McCoy. I met him back in 2014 when he decided to run for political office. Very bold of pastors to do that. I want you to listen to Rob, and specifically, I let him explain how he did what he did and why. If you're a Christian, again, you don't have to be a Christian to be pro-life, but many Christians I know say they're pro-life, and then they don't do anything about it. They think pro-life is a feeling. Oh, I'm pro-life. I feel this, I feel that. But they won't do anything about it. I've mentioned this before, and again, I'm not picking on their faith, but I talk to a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses. They come to my door, and I love talking to them. And you know what? They're pro-life. They don't like abortion. But did you know that they refuse to be involved in civics? They're above that by doctrine. So I'm not mocking them. They would agree. They will not be involved in the civic process. That is something I disagree with. I believe it's very important that you be involved regardless of your background. You need to vote your values. And I want to remind you, if you're not registered to vote, make sure you go out and register to vote, and make sure your friends and family, your faith community is registered to vote. Have a voter's drive at your church. You can find out how to do that at the California Pro-Life website or at the nrlc.org website. Find out if your friends are registered to vote, and then encourage them to vote for the good guys and gals, the folks that are going to reflect their values. Vote your values. That's what you have to do every election. If you fail to do that, then don't be surprised when people who are opposed to your values make laws that are opposed to you and to your values. When we come back on Life Matters, we're going to hear from Rob McCoy, and I think you're going to enjoy hearing from him. He's just a great guy.
You're listening to Life Matters.
Well, hi. I just wanted to thank you for joining me. You know, I have good friends, children, young adults, and adults that have Down syndrome. And they are so loved. Their parents love them so much because they're the happiest people you'd ever want to know. I really love them. I'm going to tell you something, though, that's rather frightening. The government of France has now prohibited showing positive images of Down syndrome children and letting parents know how lovable they are. That's an actual law in France. Here in the U.S., 80-some-odd% of Down syndrome kids are killed by abortion before they're born. In France, it's 96%. So we're not a whole lot better. If you'd like to help out, you can go to the National Down Syndrome Society, nbsp.org, to help out. That's nbsp.org. We really are in a battle of ideas, and lives really are at stake.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters, your program on life, on culture, and the very real battle of ideas. As I told you earlier, we have a very special guest. It's Rob McCoy. I met Rob back in 2014. And as you know, if you're listening to Life Matters, we focus on the elections as a season, not a day. It's a season. Just like Christmas is a season, you better prepare for that day. You better be ready. And so there's lots of things to do. Last week, we talked about the fact that we have what's called a trickle-up method of voting. All of our friends now, because of our work in the primary, they're going to vote for John Cox, and that's great. But the problem is this. They get to the polls, and he's the only guy they vote for. And there are dozens and dozens on that ballot. But, as we've told you before, if you know who your city council members are, if you know who your school board members are, why do we ask you to send out school board questionnaires? Because Planned Parenthood does. Because Planned Parenthood targets your kids. If you don't care enough to protect those same kids, then you don't really care. So every election cycle, we urge you to get involved locally. It's an old saying, all politics is local, but it's because those votes will trickle up. Every one of those votes will become a vote for John Cox, but we want to win across the board. Now, what's happened, we're at a very important conference in Costa Mesa, and Rob has been talking about his experience. I want him to tell you all about this principle in action, Rob.
Thanks, Brian. I have to tell you, I love the description that you just gave to your listeners. I see it the same way, maybe just a little bit different illustration. You've heard that Washington, D.C. is a swamp, Sacramento's a swamp. Well, geographically, they're swamps. But there's also this principle that they're swamps politically because they're downstream. You see, today's dog catcher is tomorrow's Congress member. Today's school board member is tomorrow's senator. And it begins at the source. And as you said, and I so appreciate it, Brian, all politics is local, but that's the source. And when it says in 1 Timothy chapter 2 that we're to pray for kings and those in authority, that we would live quiet and peaceable lives in all godliness and reverence, I say this to the over 15,000 pastors we've spoken to across the country. I say this is a pastoral epistle Paul is teaching Timothy. And he says to pray for them that we would live quiet and peaceable lives in all godliness and reverence. And I said, so you are obviously a believer of the Word of God as an evangelical Christian. Please tell me who your 5 city council members and your 5 school board members are by name that you pray for, and the issues that they're facing that would allow your citizenry to live quiet and peaceable lives in all godliness and reverence. And they can't. And it's not a gotcha. It's to open their eyes so that they realize that I will have a huge difficulty changing the federal government. I'll have a huge difficulty changing the state government, even county. But in one election cycle, the citizenry can change the local government. Yes. And so if you light 1,000 fires across the country, as small congregations band together to understand where their citizenry stands on issues like life and put them into local office, you all of a sudden set a source that will transform both county, state, and federal elections. Exactly. So I just want to encourage your listeners out there to do just that. We become moral pietists as Christians, and we use that as an excuse to abdicate our responsibility in the public square. Hey, we've got to get involved, and you have to understand the rough and tumble world of this. And it is not pastor-in-chief, it's commander-in-chief, and this is how it works. And being in politics, I understand that. But the amazing thing is you have the ability to make all kinds of inroads into this cultural mountain of influence for Christ. And having just been elected to the city council, I've seen how God has used me to minister to folks. And really, the congregation, the people who worked on behalf of this campaign, gave me the ability to be a minister in the halls of government. We send missionaries all over the world. Let's send them into government.
That's right.
So there you go, Brian. Hope that helps.
Oh, that helps a lot. I want to emphasize something that Rob said, but it's something that's actually in the scriptures all along. And I agree with you that Christians tend to get pietistic and religious, but throughout scripture, it's what you do. What you do. Faith is an action. Faith is something you do. And so what we have is we have a situation that, again, so often Christ talks about the brothers. Who's going to work in the field? Oh, I will, Dad. But then it was the son that didn't who said, I need to go do this. And if we don't do, again, faith without works is dead. Do not only be hearers of the word, be doers. This is replete in Scripture. And if you're a Christian, we are, in fact, we're heard on Christian stations, on gospel stations. We are also heard on conservative talk stations. And I really like that because on conservative talk stations, you're into doing. What's going on? What are the issues of the day? Real Christianity is about doing. It's not about theological flights of fancy. Jesus was a doer, and that was part of the revolution. That's why the Pharisees didn't like him. I want to get more specific because, to be honest, it's a great story. It may be a long one, but it's important. What you did, Rob, and really the people in your church, people who stood together for what matters. You changed one town, Thousand Oaks, and I want folks to hear that. Now, we're getting into specifics, but you need to know this works if you will do it.
Well, thanks, Brian. I appreciate you teeing it up for me. So in our city, the city of Thousand Oaks, we have a school board that was 4-1. There's 5 members of the school board, 4-1, secular progressive 4, conservative Christian 1. So I looked at that, and there was a fellow that had run twice and had lost, and his name was John Anderson. And I actually entered in as a pastor backing this political process to try to get John elected. In the course of that, I was asked to run for the state assembly. I didn't know politics, but I got a rapid education in politics. Now, I did lose the run for assembly by a little over 4,000 votes and over 100,000 cast, but John Anderson won. So our school board at that point was 3-2, secular progressive 3, 2 Christians on the school board. By the next election, I ran for city council, and I won by 52 votes and then won re-election by over 4,000. And when I ran for re-election, I ran 2 folks with me for school board, and now our school board is 3-2, conservative, 3 conservative Christians, 2 secular progressives. And this next go-round, I think it's going to be 4-1. So we have had the chance to change our community in 2 election cycles by simply participating in the process. And I'll tell you what, the secular progressives are moving heavily for the school boards because they understand how to dominate education. Yep. Because a constitutional republic will only survive to the next generation if they're educated. And what is fascinating for us as Christians is it says if we allow one of these little ones to stumble, it'd be better for us to have a millstone tied around our neck and cast in the deepest ocean. We as pastors in our own community can make a difference right now with our congregations to change local elections by participating in this great gift we've been given of a constitutional republic and to contend for life. Because you set that tone, it flows all the way downstream to the swamps of D.C. and Sacramento.
That's exactly right. And there's even more, though, and we have so little time. But if you know the geography of California, Thousand Oaks is not far from Los Angeles. In fact, there's a lot of movie people that live in Thousand Oaks. So it's a cultural center in some ways. It influences the culture. You may not know that where you live. You may not think that. But what you do locally impacts your community, and your community does change things. You mentioned there's a friend of yours now who's running for city council in Oxnard. So tell us how this is working. Talk about the growth.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Yeah. So when I ran for state assembly and then I ran for the city council, it was kind of an anathema or an enigma to pastors because we've been told for the majority of our Christian life, especially the past 50 years in the United States, that there's a separation of church and state. I was a history major. I've actually done my best to read the first 10 years of the congressional record. I don't see anything by the founders of a separation of church and state. I do believe that we're to keep the state out of the church, but not the church out of the state. And the pastors would look at me running and say, politics is dirty. And I don't want to participate. And I say, well, so's the church. I don't understand what you're getting at. And they would say, well, I'm tired of voting for the lesser of 2 evils. And I'd say, unless Jesus is running for office, you'll always be voting for the lesser of 2 evils. And they say, well, I'm going to vote for third party, or I'm not going to vote at all. And I said, then you're going to vote for that which you don't agree with, because as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, silence in the face of evil is complicit with evil itself. So you will give consent to the opposition by remaining silent. And the currency in politics is winning elections. It's that simple. So you need to run to win. So having done this and kind of setting this prototype, I guess, of a pastor being in politics, because I'm still a full-time pastor and I'm mayor pro tem of the city of Thousand Oaks. In December, I'll be mayor. And I'm still in the pulpit, and people appreciate that. I'm not the pastor of a church of 500. I have the privilege to minister to the 132,000 citizens of the city of Thousand Oaks. Well, that inspired my dear friend Lance Ralston, who's the pastor of Calvary Chapel, Oxnard. He's now thrown his hat into the ring to run for the 2nd District of the City Council of Oxnard. And what a great candidate he is, and what a difference he'll make in that city. So, hey, it's catching on, and I just hope we can do this up and down the state, because the church is the last entity remaining that can turn the state. Can I share this last aspect? In the last 10 years in California politics, $300 million has been spent in political campaigns. 2/3 of that, $200 million, has been spent by 2 entities, the CTA, the California Teachers Association, and the SEIU, the Service Employee International Union, both government unions. And the lion's share, if not all of it, has gone to one party, the Democrats. Thus, they have the executive, legislative, and judicial branch of our government locked down. And because of that unbelievable expenditure, those 2 organizations dominate the political landscape. There's only one entity left that can contend with these Goliaths, and that's the church. Yes. There's 14 million evangelical Christians in California, second only to Texas. And in 2016, the gubernatorial race was lost by 1,480,000 votes. And you had a social liberal and a fiscal conservative running against Jerry Brown, Neil Kashkari. And he lost by 1,480,000 votes. Now you have John Cox running, who is pro-life, who is a social conservative, a fiscal conservative, a Christian, an evangelical. He's a good man. And he's running for office. But of the 14 million evangelical Christians in California, 7,280,000 of them didn't even register to vote. Wow. And if those folks vote, and if the church would just engage, yes, we would have a pro-life governor. It's that simple. But they have to realize the pulpits can no longer be silent, and neither can evangelicals be apathetic. So, Brian, I hope that this has opened the eyes to some of your listeners, encourage them. And I just want to say thank you for all you do and what your listeners do. Keep up the good work. God bless you, friend.
To follow Life Matters on all social media and to subscribe to the Life Matters podcast, go to lifematters.life, where you will find everything you need to know to share life, culture, and the battle of ideas with everyone you care about. Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life. Wherever you are in the nation, you can find out more at National Right to Life. You can find vital pro-life information and also find the access to your state and local Right to Life affiliate. Get informed and get involved.